Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're having a great afternoon. And, hey, had a good Thanksgiving. I love Thanksgiving. My favorite American holiday. It's a celebration. What's Thanksgiving about? It's a celebration of the abundance that we have. It's to give thanks to this abundance and where it comes from. Where does the abundance come from? It comes from hard work. It comes from the fact that people go out there and they make and they build and they create stuff and then they trade. It's a celebration of capitalism. It's a celebration of free markets and trade. I always give thanks to the people who make that possible, to the people who work hard, to the businessmen, to the companies, to the entrepreneurs who make all the stuff that we consume, who put the chicken on the table or the turkey on the table. I mean, that requires a whole industry, a whole business, a whole grocery store chain. Capitalism is wonderful, and Thanksgiving and Christmas are both kind of celebrations. I actually like the commercialism in Christmas. I love the gift buying and the presents and the lights and the just the atmosphere that is kind of material and kind of pro-capitalist. Kind of shopping is a good thing, living a good life and enjoying it and eating good food and spending the time with family and friends and just enjoying life. So these are very uniquely American holidays. Thanksgiving and the way we celebrate Christmas here, very uniquely American. That celebration of life, that embracing material well-being, embracing wealth, embracing a good meal and gifts and family and friends and just having a good time. Love it. Love it, love it. So I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving. Last week we started going over and started discussing some of Trump's nominations, and I want to continue that this week and talk a little bit about his kind of foreign policy people he's so far appointed. Now, we still don't have the biggies. We don't have Secretary of State, and we don't have the Defense Secretary, but we do have the National Security Advisor. We have the Deputy National Security Advisor, the CIA Director, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. So we have kind of an outline of where the Trump administration is going with foreign policy and who are some of the key advisors, key thinkers. They're going to be help this administration in framing their foreign policy going forward. And so I'd like to comment, to discuss some of these appointments, and then we'll see if we have time to discuss any of the others. And also in this context, I'd like to talk about what the United States foreign policy should be. I mean, it's one thing to say American first, but how does that manifest itself? What should be our foreign policy with regard to Iran? What is Donald Trump probably going to do with the Iranians? What about Russia? What about ISIS? What about terrorism generally? How do we deal with Syria and the refugees and everything? So I want to at least hint at some of the answers to those questions. We'll see how much time we get. As we discuss these candidates, I think we'll get a better picture of my point of view on these issues and my view of what Donald Trump is ultimately going to do about these issues. If you want in on the conversation, 312-642-5600, 312-642-5600. What do you think about Trump so far? His nominations, his appointments so far, particularly when it comes to foreign policy. How do you think Donald Trump is going to deal with the Iranians? How do you think he's going to deal with the Russians? What should we do in Syria? All right, give me a call. Let's talk about it. All right, so let's start. And now, funny thing is, I know some of the people who've been appointed. I've met Michael Flynn, and I've met Kathleen McFarland. So I've met them both. Spent some time with both a little bit. I don't know them well. But have a bit of a sense of them. And, Michael Flynn is an impressive guy. I mean, this is somebody who was military intelligence. I don't know how much you guys know of my background. Now, I'm not a general, but I was in military intelligence and Israeli military intelligence between 1980 and 1982. So I was in Beirut in 1982. So I know a little bit, not a lot, but I know a little bit about intelligence, the military, about what it's like to fight in the Middle East. That I know something about. What it's like, what the enemy is like. I certainly know a lot about that. But Flynn comes from definitely an intelligence. He was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. He was actually fired from that role by President Obama, and and has since been a consultant. But I've seen him speak. I've had a chance to talk to him. I haven't read his book, which I probably should at this point, and I think you guys should to really understand. But this is where I see Flynn's strength. Clearly coming from an intelligence background in the Middle East, he was in Iraq, he's been in Afghanistan, he headed up our intelligence efforts vis-a-vis ISIS. He knows the enemy, he knows who the enemy is, he knows the enemy, and he knows the enemy is not just ISIS. He understands what's going on in the Middle East. And I've talked to him and I've seen him speak about the threat that Iran poses, but also the threat that Saudi Arabia poses. How Saudi Arabia is not really our friend. Saudi Arabia is very much behind much of what's going on in the Middle East and much of the radicalization. I think he understands that ISIS needs to be crushed in order to have a lasting impact. I think we're going to defeat ISIS here shortly, but they're not going to be crushed. And unless you crush them, they're just going to find somewhere else. They're going to pop up somewhere else. They're going to morph, just like Al-Qaeda, in a sense, morphed into ISIS. ISIS will morph into something else. You have to crush them, and how you crush them, we'll get to in a minute. So I think he has good knowledge of the Middle East. He's very good on some of these issues around ISIS. He understands that we have hampered the ability of the American troops to fight. And here I blame George W. Bush, George Bush after 9/11, rules of engagement that he sent out kids to fight under. Horrific. Just horrific. Treasonous. Kids died for nothing. Kids died in order to protect Iraqi civilians, in order to make sure they were firing at the same things. Our kids died because they had to travel with lawyers who could give a thumbs up to whether they could shoot or not. Kids died because helicopters had to get too close to their targets so, there wouldn't be too much collateral damage. Kids died because their hands were tied behind their backs and blindfolds were put in their eyes when they went into battle by the Bush administration. Of course, that continued with the Obama administration. So I think Flynn at least gets that. Whether anything will be done about it is a question, and that has to do with the culture at the Pentagon, which I think is completely corrupt and completely politicized and completely, wrong in terms of military strategy. But he might have some positive influence there. And also it's going to depend on who the Secretary of Defense is going to be, because at the end of the day, he's the one who runs the Pentagon. So what is Trump's, so Flynn is good on the Middle East, or decent on the Middle East, I'd say. He gets that radical Islam is the threat. He's not afraid of naming Islam and its relationship to that fate, to that threat. He's been accused of being Islamophobic. In this case, that's a compliment. He realizes Islam as a religion is a threat because Islam is an important component, a fundamental ideological component of those who are trying to kill us. So he understands that. Now, is he going to get Donald Trump to do the right thing in the Middle East? And, I'm quite skeptical. But, we're going to talk about what the right thing is and what I think Bush is actually going to do. Let me just talk about Kathleen McFarland. I've also met Katie McFarland. She goes by Katie. Again, smart, gets the Middle East, gets the role of Islam, very well educated. Strikes me more like a mainstream kind of foreign policy person, not a neocon, but also not a radical. I doubt that she'd support a lot of what Trump said on the campaign trail, although she claims to be a big Trump supporter. She is. She's been a commentator on Fox on foreign policy. She's had her own show on foreign policy, I guess, on the online channel of Fox News. She's had this this program that deals only with foreign policy. Very well educated. She served in the Reagan administration, and she has been an advisor to Henry Kissinger and people like that. So in that sense, very, what surprised me is very mainstream. She was a senior speechwriter to Caspar Weinberger. Now, again, under Reagan, I think the Defense Department had a much better strategy, certainly than under Bush. The neocons were less important. So their view under Reagan was you have a strong military, an incredibly strong military, and then you only go to war when it's in America's vital national interest, and then you only go to win. Now, I like that. I like that a lot. If we'd had that as a strategy, and you only go to war against an enemy that is a threat to American life and property. So America's vital national interest, and then you only go to win. So that's a good strategy for going to war. Okay, you're listening to Yaron Brook Show. We're talking foreign policy. We're talking Trump's appointments. We'll be right back. Commercials, those of you in Facebook Live. 3 minutes. All right, so today we're talking about Donald Trump's foreign policy and the foreign team he's assembled. We've got a national security advisor, Michael Flynn. We've got a CIA director. We'll talk about him in a minute, Michael Pompeo. We've got a deputy national security advisor. We just talked about Kathleen K.T. McFarland. And we have a U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley. And let me just tell you that I think the problem with Donald Trump's foreign policy is he's not radical enough. Let me repeat that. The problem with Donald Trump's foreign policy is he's too mainstream. And these people, at the end of the day, are going to be mainstream people. I want to see there's a real opportunity here because it's Donald Trump to do something radical, to do something very different. I don't think it's going to happen. Now, we'll get into that, and we'll get into what I think should be done in foreign policy in a minute. But let's just go. Mike Pompeo, again, great credentials. Guy was first in his class at West Point, is Harvard Business School. What else? He started a business and ran a business. So he's got a business background. Now he's been a House member for I think 3 terms. Solid guy. Problem with Pompeo is, again, he's very conventional conservative, right? He's very pro-NSA. We want NSA. We want surveillance. Surveillance state. So's Flynn. Worries me a lot. They want to increase NSA surveillance over Americans. Pompeo's on record at saying that he wants to bring Snowden back, and they might cut a deal with the Russians to get Snowden back, to put him on trial, and he should be given the death sentence. We should be killing Snowden for revealing the illegal activities of the United States government monitoring us. Ugh, that's just horrible. Horrible stuff. So that worries me. Again, he's not radical enough. On Islam, he's pretty good. Again, he's been called an Islamophobe. That's always, with these guys, sometimes Islamophobe relates to people who just hate for the sake of hating. But in this case, I think he was called that by CARE, which is a anti-American Muslim organization here in the United States. Horrible people. And he's good in the sense that he understands the connection between Islam and the terrorist that we face, the terrorist threat that we face. So, okay, not a bad selection. And finally, Nikki Haley at the UN. Nikki's a good governor. I take it. Again, a moderate, mainstream Republican, nothing too radical. I have no idea what her views on foreign policy. I think nobody does. Okay, so here's my point, right? Like, Donald Trump wants to be this clear the swamp. I can't think of anything more swampy, more disgusting, more offensive than being at the United Nations. Like, this is an organization where the Human Rights Commission often has people from Syria or from Cuba or from Venezuela on, places or North Korea, violate human rights on a massive scale. And yet they're in the Human Rights Commission. It's an anti-Israeli, anti-American, anti-Western entity. Even at its founding, the Security Council comprised of America and Stalin and the Soviet Union, right, on equal footing, both with veto power. I mean, that's morally offensive. It's morally disgusting. Mao Zedong, when China was invited into the Security Council, again, veto power. You can't sit at the table with Stalin and Mao and pretend that you're equal morally. These are evil regimes, evil people. And the United States is much, much better than them and shouldn't be anywhere near them. Shouldn't be in the same organization as these people. So no, I think the United Nations should be disassembled. Put it away. You can create a union of free countries. It's something like NATO, right? A union of free countries, countries that are basically free, that share some interest. But you don't create a union of Zimbabwe, Venezuela, the United States, and Great Britain. I mean, what does that mean? What common interest do they have? They don't have a common interest. So, you want to be radical? Let's be radical. Let's really piss people off. I'd say, Donald Trump's a real estate guy. That real estate that the United Nations has in New York worth a lot of money. Ship them all to Caracas in Venezuela. Let the United Nations meet in Venezuela. They just come to the United States, these foreign leaders, and insult America. Let them insult America from Venezuela instead of from the United States. Somebody else take them. That real estate, you could build nice, overlooking the river, overlooking Brooklyn on the other side. Nice property. We don't need the United Nations. So if you really want to be radical, then don't put Nikki Haley at the United Nations. Put somebody either insignificant to say, I don't really care about this organization, it's stupid. Start cutting its budget significantly, or ideally just get out. Just get out. It's a lousy organization. The whole structure. You see, my foreign policy is completely different. Donald Trump says America first. He talks the talk, but it's not real because he doesn't know what America is. This is the big problem with Donald Trump. He doesn't know what America is. So what does it mean to be America first? It means that the only priority of the government, the only role of government is to protect the freedoms of Americans, to protect the individual rights of Americans, the right to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. That's the role. The United Nations does not serve a role in protecting the lives and property of Americans. Out you go. It's easy, right? And then every alliance, every relationship, you have to evaluate. Does it serve a purpose in protecting the lives and property of Americans, or doesn't it? Every relationship we have with another country, does it serve the purpose of protecting the lives and property of Americans, or doesn't it? It's simple, right? So that should be the standard, right? That should be the standard. But it isn't. Again, Trump is conventional when it comes to it. I think he's going to be conventional on most of how he governs. He'll be a conventional Republican. He'll be an outrageously conventional Republican because he'll say outrageous things and he'll govern very conventionally. And the things that he might be more radical on, he's going to be wrong on, like building a wall and like trade. Those are the things that he's weakest on. Okay, if you want to enter the conversation, if you want to talk, I want to ask any questions, or if you want to comment on my views about foreign policy or Donald Trump's views about foreign policy, 312-642-5600, 312-642-5600. So I have very little to say about Nikki Haley because I don't think there should be a U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. I think we need to get out of that organization. And I also think that Donald Trump was right about NATO. Again, I don't think he's going to do anything about it because I think he'll govern as a moderate, as a middle of the roader. But I think he was right about NATO. The Europeans are rich enough to defend themselves. Why do we have to defend the Europeans, right? I mean, all you Germans out there who might be listening to this, or Dutch or Danes or whatever, your countries are wealthy enough. You guys claim, particularly if you're in Scandinavia, that you're actually richer than we are in the United States. Well, okay, you don't need us then. What do you need us for? Do I want to send my kid to die to protect Estonia? As much as I love the Estonians or the Ukrainians, right? Or the Germans. Do I need to protect the Germans? They can defend themselves. Russia's not that big of a threat. It's a poor country. They've got one industry, which is energy, which has been devastated by the decline of energy prices. And if Donald Trump actually does what he said he would do in terms of energy policy, that is free up drilling in the United States, oil prices are going to drop even further, which is kind of curious. Why? I just thought of this. Why is Putin supporting Donald Trump when Donald Trump is going to bring about a decline in energy prices? Going to be interesting to watch. Will he follow up on his energy policies? So, should there be a NATO? Maybe, as long as it is Islamist threat. It's a union that can be a self-protection union to fight a real threat. I don't think Russia is a threat to the United States. I think Putin's a really, really, really bad guy. Let's be clear. I don't like him at all. He's a thug. He's a bad, bad guy, but he's not a threat to the United States. So should we be placing our troops as a barrier between Putin and Europe when Europe is wealthy enough to fund their own defense? I don't think so. So I think Donald Trump was onto something when he talked about, but he's not going to follow up. You can see that the people here that he's appointed, none of them are going to be for leaving NATO or changing the relationship with NATO in any kind of fundamental sense. All right, you're listening to Yaron Brook Show, where we're radical in everything. Talk to you soon. No. Oh my God. This time there's another 4 minutes. Here we go. All right. Well, we're talking about foreign policy. We're talking about Trump's appointments for foreign policy. We've gone through the 4 appointments so far. And I was just articulating a few principles of my foreign policy. And finally, I get a caller from somebody who agrees with me. Hey, Sharon, how's it going? My pleasure. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, I think you're right in the sense the millennials are really delusional, and it really is a challenge on getting them to understand the basic principles on which this country was founded and the basic principles that are required for this country to thrive. And what they want with Bernie, what they wanted is basically social democracy. And this is what Trump, this is what Hillary and Obama have tried to do from the beginning. What they've always wanted, and this is what the left wants, they want us to be like Europe. They envy Europe, and they want us to be like the Europeans. And sure. Well, they actually like what she's doing. I think the millennials like what Merkel is doing. I mean, yeah. Sure. I mean, yep. You're on a roll, Sean. I'm going to try to get us back to foreign policy. Thanks for calling. Really appreciate the passion and the excitement. But I don't really know that much about the bankruptcy of the school and how much corruption and how involved she was. Although I wouldn't be surprised if there was a cover up. But I want to get back quickly to foreign policy, and then I've got a call from Nathaniel who wants to talk about a different Trump potential appointee, but I'm going to wait until after the break to do that. I want to go back to, look, I agree with a lot of what you said there, but I don't think, and this is where you're going to hate me, Sean, I don't think that the problem that the United States faces is anywhere near the problem that Europe faces in terms of immigration. We are not being flooded by Muslims. We're not hundreds of thousands of millions of Muslims coming into this country, which is what is happening in Europe. We are not going through an epidemic. Epidemic's a bad word, but just a flurry of terrorist activities against us as Europe is incited by exactly those immigrants that are coming in. We do not see Muslims in the United States unassimilated to the extent that they are in Europe, because they've embraced multiculturalism so much that they refuse to require their Muslim population to assimilate. There's no assimilation in Europe. Muslims in the United States, the situation is very different than it is in Europe. So I don't buy that there's a parallel, because I don't think we're in that bad shape. I think Europe's much, much worse than where we are. And I don't think a wall is going to ever stop a terrorist. It doesn't stop them in Israel. You just saw the fires in Haifa where they're burning down parts of Israel. They got into Israel in spite of the fence. Walls don't solve problems. We've got an enemy, and this is why I get radical again. You got an enemy. It's called Islamic Totalitarianism, radical Islam, jihadists, whatever you want. Find them, crush them, kill them where they live. Don't let them immigrate in here, because get them before they even leave their countries. And the way to do that is to figure out where the spearhead of this ideology is. And the spearhead is in two countries, Iran and Saudi Arabia. And until we're willing to deal with the funding, the training, the weapons that those two countries supply for every Islamist terrorist group in the world, until we define Iran and Saudi Arabia as our enemy. We cannot win this. You don't win by building walls. You win by going over there and crushing them and making it so painful for them to kill Americans that they never think of doing it again. You're listening to Yaron Brook Show. We'll be right back. All right, this is probably the only radio show where you will hear somebody say that they think Donald Trump's views on foreign policy or actions on foreign policy, I think as they manifest themselves in the coming years, are going to be conventional, mainstream, not radical enough. I've already called for the U.S. to rethink NATO, withdraw from the United Nations, and declare Saudi Arabia and Iran number one and number two enemies of the United States, and deal with them accordingly in order to defeat Islamism. That's America first. That is a foreign policy that places the individual rights of Americans first. Identify who is the threat and deal with it. Don't play around. Don't play around. Don't make yourself loved and liked, which I think is what Donald Trump will do. A big part of his presidency is try to make the world love him. A little bit like Obama. We will see. We will see. All right, Nathaniel wants to talk about Treasury Secretary. Go ahead, Nathaniel. Good afternoon. Well, I actually want John Allison, who is, it looks like, is being considered for the Treasury Secretary. I want John Allison as president. I don't want him as Treasury Secretary. Yes, John Allison is against deposit insurance. I think that's the best financial reform idea ever put forward. I am against deposit insurance. Both John and I are for privatizing deposit insurance. And therefore, if you get rid of deposit insurance, you get rid of the entire regulatory infrastructure that is there to prop up the banks so they don't default on your deposits. You get rid of all the regulations, and then you let the market actually monitor banks. John, if you were allowed to speak his mind, if you were allowed to execute on half of the things that he believes in, if he was allowed to really disagree with Trump, if he's allowed to have influence over the decisions the Trump administration made with regard to trade, he would be the best Treasury, potentially the best Treasury Secretary in the history of the United States. He's certainly the most principled and most knowledgeable, potential candidate I can think of for a position, for that position. The question is, yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Just like I'm radical in foreign policy, John and I are very radical when it comes to economics. He is a capitalist. He believes the only job of government, foreign policy-wise, but also domestic-wise, is the protection of individual rights. You don't protect individual rights with deposit insurance, you violate them. You don't protect individual rights by having a central bank, you violate them. And John Allison is on record as abolishing the central bank. You don't protect individual rights by setting trade barriers. You violate them by setting trade barriers because you violate the rights of Americans to trade with whoever they want. So John Allison would be a voice of reason, a voice of individual rights, a voice for freedom in the administration. The question is, will anybody listen to him? Will anybody actually take him seriously? And if they do, then again, this could be the most important appointment of a Treasury Secretary in American history because he could really do something substantial and fundamental. If they don't, if he's just there for show, it could be a disaster because then he might be associated then with such policies as trade barriers, a re-regulation of the financial industry where you don't really do anything, you just move the pieces on the board, you don't actually fundamentally revise them. But look, freedom is good. Freedom financially, for the financial industry is good. Freedom for the individual is good. Personal responsibility. You should be monitoring the bank that you invest money in. And the market should be monitoring that, not some government bureaucrat who creates moral hazard and creates bad behavior among bankers. So what we want is more freedom. John Allison is the freedom candidate here. But because he's so radical, I doubt that he'll be offered the position. Thanks, Nathaniel. I appreciate that. But yes, I think the Trump administration and many people who support Trump believe that it is the way you do it is by force. And what you need is to crush those bankers and destroy Wall Street and start from scratch. And that is a anti-American, anti-capitalist, anti-individual freedom, anti-individual rights perspective, and anti-reality perspective. The fact is that what creates value, that what builds and makes stuff is the human mind. What you need is to liberate the mind. And the human mind, rationality, reason, our capacity to think is threatened, is held back, is stifled by a gun, by a fist, by force, by coercion, by dictation, so what you need, if you want economic growth, if you want success, if you want prosperity, if you want individuals to have opportunities, all individuals, rich, poor, middle class, then what you need is freedom. Freedom from coercion, freedom from government intervention, freedom from government regulation. And what you need is to wipe out the regulations, not to tinker with them. Wipe them out, like get rid of deposit insurance. So we need to be radical. You're listening to the radical Yaron Brook. All right, so we're talking foreign policy. We're talking about the appointments so far that Trump has made in foreign policy. Not bad, not bad. I'd give it a B, B minus. Just not radical enough. Just too conventional. Too conventional. Now, Flynn is pretty good. I think he'd be good on Islam. I think he recognizes who the enemy is. Will anybody pay attention? Will the Trump administration actually act on what Flynn recommends in the Middle East? We will have to wait and see. McFarlane, not bad. KT is not bad. Haley, Pompeo, too much surveillance, too much focus on a surveillance state. The job of the U.S. government is to protect the individual rights of Americans, not violate them. Not violate them. You want to listen to my calls? Get a warrant. You want to listen to somebody's calls? Have probable cause and go after them, right? But do not blanket, listen in, look at emails. We should not be the surveillance state. We should be anti the surveillance state. You want to defeat the whole phenomenon of Islamic terrorism? Take out the motivation. Show them that they will be defeated. Show them that they will be crushed. Show them that Allah is not on their side. You know, the self-radicalized people here in the United States, why are they self-radicalizing suddenly? Because ISIS is being successful. Because the ideology has proved competent. They pulled down the World Trade Center. They killed 3,000 Americans. We did almost nothing. Then they've taken over huge parts of Syria and Iraq. We did nothing. They established a caliphate. We did nothing. They kill Americans here. They kill Americans there. We do nothing. People love to join a winning cause, particularly if it promises them, a life in heaven with 72 virgins. But take away the winning part of the cause, and nobody joins. Nobody joins a losing cause. I mean, very few people. Some people do, but very few people. It's not a mass movement. People rallied and went to Syria to join ISIS because ISIS was taking territory. ISIS looked victorious. They were slaughtering people on YouTube, and the West was completely impotent, didn't stop them, didn't do anything. That motivates. When you take away the motivation, when you crush them, when you destroy them, when you annihilate them, nobody's going to join the cause. And that's what has to happen. And it's not fun, right? A lot of people will die. if you fought a war properly, if you actually engaged in a proper war with Iran and Saudi Arabia. Iran funds all the radicalization in the world on the Shiite side. Saudi Arabia funds all the radicalization on the Sunni side. You want to get rid of the radicalization? Stop them from doing that. You know, maybe with the Saudis, we just need to squeeze them harder because we're supposedly allies. But Saudi families, wealthy families in Saudi Arabia, are funded ISIS, fund terrorism, fund all the mosques in the United States where radicalization happens, all the mosques in Europe and in Asia and everywhere. It's all Saudi money. Put the screws on them to stop it. Iran, you got to have regime change in Iran. You got to get rid of a mullah-based. You got to have regime change, not stopping just a nuclear deal. What did Trump say? He'd renegotiate the deal. He's not going to. I'm willing to put money on this that he will not renegotiate the deal. But more importantly, that's not good enough. That regime has to go. Has to go. All right. You know, on this show, we call for radical change domestically and internationally. You'll be listening to the Yaron Brook Show. I encourage you to go out there, read Ayn Rand, and stay tuned. We'll be back. We're here every Saturday, and look forward to talking to you soon. You'll be listening to the Yaron Brook Show. Perfect. Thank you. See you sometime. Bye. Am I on tomorrow? Yeah. See you then. Bye. You too.